Com.
The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. With the news at this time, I am Tiana Jordan. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. The People's National Congress Reform is spearheading efforts to regroup the coalition umbrella, a partnership for national unity. As a number of teachers are set to stay away from work, the Labour Ministry warns that they will lose a day's pay. And in regional news, several persons have died in Brazil after a piece of rock facing collapsed on them. Antigua and Barbuda parliamentarians are asking for a pay increase. And for the international news, we'll bring to you the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, which results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, has invited the Working People's Alliance, WPA, and the Justice for All Party, JFAP, to meetings to discuss rejoining a Partnership for National Unity, APNU. The WPA has already laid down several minimum conditions, while the JFAP is not interested. Executive member of the WPA, Dr. David Hines, says that among its demands is the guarantee that his party will be allowed to select its representative to become a parliamentarian. He also wants to ensure that the WPA and other parties that are a part of APNU meet to craft policies.
If we're going to get into a coalition again, we will have to have a guarantee that the coalition would have structures, it would have systems, and the decision making must be democratic. That is, there should be consensus in decision making.
General Secretary for the Justice for All Party, Savitri Sharma, says that her party is not active and it is not interested in rejoining APNU because of Chandra Narayan Sharma's poor health.
CN is getting down, and I don't think he can handle that. He would wish to go and join up back with them, but I don't think he's capable of doing it at this stage in his life. He has to pay attention, focus more on his health now. And for me, I don't want to get back into that political arena.
General Secretary of the Justice for All Party, Savitri Sharma. The JFAP had exited APNU shortly after the March 2, 2020 general and regional elections, after the representative of the list of candidates for APNU plus AFC, David Granger, had said that a party needed at least 7,000 votes to deserve a parliamentary seat. The WPA had left APNU after Mr. Granger had picked Tabitha Sarbo-Hali, marking the end of a testy relationship punctuated by concerns over lack of consultations. A number of teachers at government-owned schools are expected to stay away from work today to protest the surge in COVID-positive educators and students. The Guyana Teachers Union, GTU, is calling today Isolation Day, even as the teachers are pressing demands for the Ministry of Education to shut down all schools for 14 days to assess the situation. The GTU says that more than 175 teachers and more than 90 students are COVID positive. Minister of Labour, Joseph Hamilton, says the Ministry of Education will be right to take out 1 day's pay from the salaries of teachers who stay away from work today.
Teachers in Guyana ought to be properly advised that heeding the call of the GTU to participate in the isolation day may be considered as an unauthorized absence from work, abandonment of their students, and a gross dereliction of their duties. In this regard, the Ministry of Education will be under no lawful obligation to pay persons who are absent and abandon their posts on Monday 10th, 2022.
The Labour Minister says the GTU did not notify the Ministry of Education of a work stoppage or strike. He also says that the union should seek the conciliation of the Ministry of Labour. But the union is condemning the threat.
Even while you're Minister of Labour, you have been lacking. Because if we were to close the schools in Guyana, many would be closed. Because they are all operating against the laws of this country. So those are the things that you need to fix. And those are the things you need to tell your colleague minister to fix, rather than jumping out there to offer foolish threats to citizens. Let me remind you, like you read this morning, teachers are not essential workers. And so teachers have a right to display their disapproval when things are not right.
GTU General Secretary Coretta MacDonald. Guyana's coronavirus surge continues, even as 3 more persons have succumbed to the disease. The Health Ministry says that 657 new cases have been recorded within the past 24 hours. The number of active cases now stands at 5,894. Of the 107 persons who are now hospitalized, 5 are receiving intensive care. The 5,787 others have been told to isolate themselves at home. The Health Ministry says the death toll has now risen to 1,070. 2 of the 3 elderly persons who passed away from the disease were not vaccinated. And now in regional news. At least 6 people were killed and 9 others were seriously injured when a rock wall atop motorboats collapsed beneath a waterfall in southeastern Brazil. A rock suddenly broke free from the canyon wall and crashed into several pleasure boats, creating a huge wave over the lake at Capitolio in Minas Gerais state. Videos posted to social media showed tourists screaming as the rock column slammed into the water. At least 1 affected boat sank, others sped away. According to the fire service, divers were looking for 20 missing persons. Fire service spokesman Pedro Ayara says 2 boats were directly hit by the rocks and 24 people were saved alive. 6 bodies have been recovered. The people injured in the accident had broken bones, and 1 was in the hospital in serious condition with head and face injuries. He said 23 others were treated for minor injuries. The region has experienced heavy rainfall for 2 weeks, which may have dislodged the rock face. On Saturday, a levee at an iron ore mine overflowed 300 kilometers to the east, closing a major federal highway. The incumbent Barbados Labour Party is promising the construction of 10,000 houses in 5 years. If the electorate returns to the BLP to power at the January 19th general elections, the Mia Mottley administration says Barbadians will not pay land tax on the first $200,000 of property value. That party is also offering the electorate education reform, especially moving away from the Barbados secondary school entrance examination. The BLP's 33-page manifesto, entitled Our Barbados, Owning Our Future, also includes an attached 18-page list of promises kept. Prime Minister Mutley explained that the second-term pledges were centered on 5 core values. The Tobago House of Assembly, THA, will abolish what is being termed the ridiculous dress code at public buildings in Tobago. Chief Secretary Farley Augustine made the announcement on Sunday during a post-executive council media briefing after a 5-day retreat. The Progressive Democratic Patriots (PDP) deputy leader said no longer will people wearing short pants, a slipper or sleeveless garment be denied service at a THA building. He says that entities like schools and other specialized areas will all retain their dress code. Mr. Augustine said the existing policy is archaic and rooted in colonialism. The Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly says no one can convince him that in the tropics people must be turned back because they are wearing slippers. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown says that his cabinet of ministers are asking for a pay increase. Mr. Brown says he earns $15,000 per month. The Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister says that eventually they will be paid more in the same way as government workers.
Many of my ministers since last term would have said to me that at some point, we have to review the parliamentary pay. I mean, I don't know when that will be. Clearly, we can't do it now because of the COVID situation and so on. But we also have to increase the pay of public servants. But I don't know we can continue to increase public servants' pay and at some point do not revise the pay for parliamentarians. So if you had to do an analysis of the work that ministers do in particular and the pay, there are many who will argue that they are underpaid based on the existing pay scales in Antigua and Barbuda, both in the public and private sectors.
The Prime Minister of Antigua and other parliamentarians do not have to pay water, electricity, telephone, and internet bills. And now for the international news, here's the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The number 1 men's tennis player, Novak Djokovic, has won his appeal against the Australian government and will be allowed to stay in the country. But the Australian government has indicated it might exercise its powers and cancel his visa anyway. Here's Russell Fuller.
It was Judge Anthony Kelly who decided to quash the decision by Australian Border Force when Novak Djokovic arrived in Melbourne last Wednesday night to cancel his visa. He also asked the government to pay the costs because he decided not that the Australian Border Force were wrong in saying that having had COVID in the last 6 months is not a decent grounds for an exemption from taking the vaccine, but that actually they didn't handle it reasonably. They didn't give Djokovic the time he needed to consult his lawyers. For the moment, technically, Novak Djokovic is a free man.
Diplomats from the United States and Russia are meeting in Geneva for the first of a series of talks over Ukraine. The US Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, said the US would listen to Russian concerns and share their own. Russia has deployed 100,000 troops close to its border with Ukraine. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has said last week's unrest was caused by an attempted coup. He was speaking during a video conference of leaders of a military alliance of former Soviet states, including President Putin. Caroline Davies reports.
Just over a week since protests first began in Kazakhstan, the country's president said that order had been restored. President Tokayev blamed what he called armed militants who turned initial peaceful protests violent. President Putin agreed, saying that he believed that the militants had been trained in foreign terrorist camps and had experience of combat. Despite its 30-year history, this was the first joint mission by the CSTO, the security alliance led by Russia. Mr. Putin said that the deployment to Kazakhstan would be temporary, but that the dispatch of troops sent the signal that the group would not allow revolutions to destabilise the region.
A court in military-ruled Myanmar has sentenced the detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi to 4 years in prison. She was accused of possessing unlicensed walkie-talkies. Jonathan Head reports.
Ms Suu Kyi, who's not been seen in public since her arrest, still has several more serious charges confronting her of corruption, election fraud and of breaking the Official Secrets Act. She's currently being held under house arrest. The ruling junta still faces widespread opposition. Some parts of the country are now engulfed in armed conflict and the economy is near collapse. Neighbouring countries are seeking a negotiated end to the conflict. So far, they've made little progress, but if they do, it's likely that such talks would at some point have to involve Aung San Suu Kyi, who remains very popular in Myanmar.
World News from the BBC. Uganda has instructed children to return to school almost 2 years after they were closed because of the coronavirus pandemic. Students will resume classes a year above where they left off. Uganda's National Planning Authority said that a third of children who were in school before the pandemic may never return. Beijing's municipal government is asking all residents, more than 20 million people, to stay in the city during the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday to restrict the spread of COVID. It comes during a second day of testing in the nearby city of Tianjin, where cases of the Omicron variant have been discovered. Stephen McDonnell is in Beijing.
All trains from Tianjin to Beijing have been halted. The 14 million people who live in the northern port city now need permission from either their employer or housing community to leave. With only weeks to go until the Winter Olympics, China is for the first time officially battling an outbreak of COVID's Omicron variant. Authorities have also announced that Omicron cases have already spread from Tianjin to Henan province. Following concern that international teams arriving in Beijing might bring more Omicron cases into China, traffic officials here have advised locals not to approach vehicles carrying Olympic athletes, even if they have a car accident.
One of the main buyers of Belarus's big export, potash, says it's ending its purchases from April. The Norwegian fertiliser company Yara said international sanctions made it impossible to continue the trade. The crop nutrient is one of the main foreign currency earners for Belarus. The New Zealand director Jane Campion has won this year's Best Film Award at the Golden Globes for her western Power of the Dog. Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story was named Best Musical or Comedy. The television awards were dominated by the series Succession. BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
To end the news, here's a look at the lead stories once again. The People's National Congress Reform is spearheading efforts to regroup the coalition umbrella, a partnership for national unity. As a number of teachers are set to stay away from work, the Labour Ministry warns that they will lose a day's pay. And in regional news, several persons have died in Brazil after a piece of rock facing collapsed on them. Antigua and Barbuda parliamentarians are asking for a pay increase. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.